A very good morning to all of you. So from the most interesting subject which engages all of us, which is cricket, we now talk about another stream, digital ubiquity, and hopefully I'll make it as interesting as possible. So at Cisco, I was actually leading digital transformation across 8 countries. And that was the last job that I did before retiring. And it was certainly very, very interesting. I'll draw a lot from my experience there when I speak to you. So when we talk about the digital world, let me first take you to a film, Minority Report, which came out in 2002, 22 years ago. Now, the interesting thing about the film was that it predicted so many events that took place later. For instance, it talked about automated cars, it talked about automated homes, it talked about gesture-based computing, it talked about a variety of other things, all of which came true. But the interesting thing was that this was based on an article written by Philip Dick in 1956. So digital arrived many years ago. In this particular scene, in the Minority Report, where Tom Cruise walks into a shop, it actually recognizes him through retina identification, and the image that you see is actually spewing forth a message specifically directed at Mr. Nagakawa, because he has done a retina transformation and taken the retina of Mr. Nagakawa. So imagine in 2002, 22 years ago, they predicted so many things which came true. But that's true for so many other inventions as well. Now, if you took a guess, you will see that MP3 player, the GPS, cell phone, all arrived many, many years ago. In fact, when you talk about artificial intelligence, the first reference to artificial intelligence happened in 1950. Alan Turing referred to it in his book. And as you can see, the MP3 player happened in 1979, GPS 78. So it's been around for a long time. I think we're taking a lot more notice of it now. Now let me take you through a few examples of how digital transformation works. I'm going to focus more on how technology is an enabler and helps us to work out solutions to real problems. So let me start with a project that we did in Kerala with the government of Kerala. This was in Kannur district, and it was about proving that farming is viable, because we have 15,000 farmer deaths every year in India because they're taking loans and they can't repay them. So this whole exercise was to ensure that we can prove that farming is viable. So what we did was, we took a small project, which was about, and the government directed us to focus on rice, which is paddy, and prawns. So we took sensors and put it into the water and on the land, and you can see a picture there below. And all that information about the soil characteristics and the water characteristics were transmitted to what is called a village knowledge center, which the government had created. And the village knowledge center used to work on all this information. They used to combine it with weather-related information and transmit it to farmers in 15 panchayats. Then we created a website where they could connect with the local sources and procure material at much lower prices. For instance, for 1 kilo of prawn, you need 1.5 kilo of inputs. And they could procure it at much lower rates. So similarly, the farmers had to be trained in the local language. So a website was created so that they could assimilate in the local language. The engineering college helped them to understand all of this. And when you put it all together, we got EY to do a report which actually proved that farming could be extremely viable. And as soon as we did this project, there were 11 other states in the country in our country who put out an RFP for exactly the same purpose, to facilitate farmers so that they can make it work for themselves. And this is another project that we did. In one of the states, the pensioners were out on the streets protesting because they were not getting the pension. So you can imagine this lady, old lady, infirm, and the government used to take proof of life once a year, once in 12 months. And by which time a lot of people had expired. And the pensions were still going out to people who had expired, not just because of lapses in the system, but because of other reasons as well, which you and I know about. And the whole idea was to fix this. They used to have to go to offices far away, take a long walk. They'll have to put their signature on a document, and because they were infirm, the signature, their own signature, would look different from what they recorded, and so on and so forth. And we also found out that the leakage to the government, because of pensions going to the wrong people and the right people not getting pensions, the loss is about 1,000 crores or so. So the idea was, now, how do we find a solution? So we created a black box which would recognize the voice of the person. It would also recognize if anybody was trying to simulate the voice or copy the voice, or was playing a recording. And so this black box was put in place, and the pensioner was given a time where he had to call up a particular number, he or she, and read out a message. And the machine would recognize that, yes, this is a living person, this is not a recording, this is not a mimic, and therefore proof of life has been obtained. So now proof of life was being done 12 times a year. And money was not going out to people who were not living. And people who were living were getting their pensions on time, and all the unrest in that particular state went down, and the government in the process saved close to 900 odd crores. So now I'm trying to give you a glimpse of how digital transformation can work across the board in any sector that you can think of. And this was a project that we did in Indonesia. It had to do with poaching. And so the government said that we want to cut down poaching in this huge forest. So we said we'll do a POC, a proof of concept. We took a certain portion of the forest. We divided it into the hot zones where poaching actually took place, and the cold zones where poaching was not taking place. In the hot zones, we chose a particular spot. We made sure that the rangers could get there in under 3 minutes. We used cameras, and we used sensors, and we used analytics so that we could sense any unusual motion. And the moment all this came together and they could sense some unusual motion, which usually had to do with poachers, not animals, the lights would come on and the sirens would go off and the alarms would go on and the rangers would get there in 3 minutes. What do you think happened? Poaching went down to 0. We did it in a small spot, and then, of course, they extended it to other parts of the forest where it was happening. So the thing I'm trying to highlight here is it's not about technology. Technology is an enabler. It's more about thinking through what the problem is and finding appropriate solutions enabled by technology. Let's take retail. Very different from the other sectors. But do you know that Tesco in South Korea, many, many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, created a shop on the walls of a station. So when the people were going to work, they could actually, capture the pictures, the codes, and they could order whatever they wanted. And by the time they got home from work, the items would be delivered to them. So various innovations, it's all about innovation enabled by technology. For instance, you have a lot of problems in India relating to reverse logistics, which means you order for an item, you don't like it, and you want to return it. Now, if it has to do with clothes, there's a company that's come out with a system which identifies 44 different characteristics to make sure that when they ship items to you, they're the right items. And therefore, the level of reverse logistics and the money that gets wasted in that goes down. Many, many innovations are taking place. For instance, you can try on clothes without even visiting the shop. So you can digitally try on the clothes and see whether it works for you or not. Many innovations happening here. We did a project with Bangalore Airport. This was pre-COVID. At that time, if I recall, there were about 30 million passengers being catered to by the airport per day. So the whole issue is, of course, they have terminal number 2 now, but you cannot keep on creating terminals and runways. You've got to do the best that you can with the resources that you have. So we worked with the strategy team at Bangalore Airport, and we said, what we're going to do is reduce the turnaround time between the aircraft landing and the aircraft taking off. And the idea was reduce it by 3 minutes. If we reduced it by 3 minutes, the productivity at the first terminal would go up by 10%, which means same amount of investments, but productivity going up 10%. Huge thing. So we put cameras in place and we found out that there are different teams, right? There's catering, and there's the cleaning crew, and there's transportation of the pilots to and fro, and all of that, and nobody talks to each other. So just by putting systems in place, just by putting measurements in place with sensors appropriately capturing the information, we were easily able to do it. And this project is operational in Bangalore Airport, and they're taking it to the next level. Because they expect that in 10 years, Bangalore Airport will have 83 million passengers using it per day, per year, which is huge. And they have to think through it right now for the anticipated, demand. Now let me take a couple of examples from manufacturing. So this is a project we did in Australia. We were working with one of the big names. I think it was BHP. And in their mines, what used to happen is that sometimes the whole conveyor belt would come to a stop, and all the work would stop, and that would cost them millions of dollars. And the problem was that sometimes the boulders that were put on the conveyor belt were just too large. So simple sensors put in place, and they were able to eject the large boulders, and the conveyor belts never stopped, and business continued, and they saved millions of dollars. In India, there are a couple of interesting projects that we've done. For instance, our mines are not so advanced, and what happens is when the miner is deep down there, he needs somebody to talk to. And so we connected them to the control room so the miner could actually converse with people in the control room, so that he's not so lonely and alone so many meters below the earth. The second area that we worked on in Indian mines is traffic. In Australia, for instance, they have automated vehicles which won't create accidents. But this is a big problem in Indian mines. And so we put a whole traffic management system below the earth to be able to manage traffic using digital systems to make sure that there were no accidents. There's a lot of innovation going on in manufacturing, as you know. For instance, preventive maintenance can entirely be done through artificial intelligence engines. I'm sure a lot of you use it. You have quality control, which can be done so much better with machines than people. You have, for instance, so many references and books and pages that you have to refer to, and that's possible to do through AR and so on and so forth. I'll come to more of this in due course. Now let me shift gear and the buzz is about artificial intelligence. Like the earlier buzz was about digital transformation, but now it is AI-led digital transformation. It's the conversation piece that's at center stage. So let me give you some insights into what's going on. So the first person who gave a name to artificial intelligence, I think it's named wrongly. It should be called augmented intelligence. I don't know why it's artificial intelligence. Nevertheless, John McCarthy was the guy at MIT who named it in 1956. These are some of the seminal moments. 1968, there was a film called the 2000 Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's film. And I think it was about, they discovered a monolith and therefore they sent out a space mission to figure out the antecedents of the Earth and how we came about. And what happens is the computer, called HAL, starts taking over the systems and eliminating the people on the mission till such time there's a fight back. So it's a very interesting story, but they anticipated that AI could go rogue. In 1997, you have IBM. They created the computer system to play chess, and it defeated the world champion Garry Kasparov. That was way back in 1997. In 2004, you had another interesting film. It was called Isaac Asimov's science fiction. I think they put together a number of his stories. It was called I, Robot, the name of the film. And in that, again, I think one of the scientists gets killed. And they're wondering whether the robot did it. And in that, the interesting thing about the film is they talk about 3 rules of robotics. First is that the robot can't harm humans. Second, that the robot must obey instructions provided it doesn't violate rule number 1. And the third rule was that the robot must protect itself provided it doesn't cut rule number 1 or rule number 2. So that was an interesting development at that time. And then in 2016, you had Google DeepMind, which is a forerunner in AI. They mastered the Chinese game Go. Now, what is interesting about this is Chinese game Go is more intuitive. It's not like chess, where there are clear moves that are made. This is more ambiguous. And suddenly, the computer was able to, the artificial intelligence engine was able to figure out all these intuitive moves and beat the world champion even in the game Go. So it was a significant change. And then in 2018, an interesting thing happened. Again, Google DeepMind. They created a neural network simulating the human brain. And they created a virtual maze, and they asked the neural network to penetrate the maze. And it did. And then they found that it had actually it had absorbed a mammalian characteristics to be able to penetrate the maze, the virtual maze. And the artificial intelligence, when they looked at it, they found that the code had been written by the machine itself. So no human had written that code. The system had written the code. And that's when all the alarm bells went off. For instance, if you ask, Elon Musk has stated that artificial intelligence is dangerous. It's like giving everybody access to nuclear weapons. So would you do that? You wouldn't. Therefore, there have to be controls on artificial intelligence as well. So what is AI? So AI, it's combining various aspects of technology, whether it is natural language processing or conversion of speech to text or computer vision to do with cameras, audio inputs, sensor inputs. Now sensors, again, great thing. Machines are telling you more and more information about what they're doing, or machine learning, or advanced analytics, and it's giving you expert opinions as well. It's got expert systems operating. So essentially, solving problems, helping in decision making. And then you have narrow AI. Narrow AI is like chess, where it is specific for a particular use, and general AI, where it can be used for all sorts of things. So that's where it's going. And now, if you look at industry, you'll find that it's across the board. AI is being widely used across the board. For instance, in vaccines and drug discovery, we did a project, I think it was a hospital in Taiwan, where to detect cancer early, it would go through hundreds and hundreds of pictures and come to a conclusion and be able to give a definitive, or near definitive diagnosis about whether this person needed more attention or not. So you have vaccines and drug discovery. The time periods have been compressed substantially. There's cancer detection, which I told you about. There's surgery. Now, for instance, with robots helping in surgeries, you see the hand movement of surgeons is limited, right? Because our hand can move in a certain direction, and it can't. No such limitation with the robot. It can turn it in completely the other direction. It can do nuanced work which no surgeon can do. So that's where we are. Fashion, lots of things happening, and which we talked about, and of course in telecom, where it can handle huge amounts of information. It can draw inferences very fast, can take decisions very fast, it can process extremely fast. So now, after we talked about AI, you now come to the age of generative AI, where you have so many programs that can do so many things for you automatically. For instance, if it's pictures or artworks, you have programs like DALL-E, which I think is based on Salvador Dali, or at least the genesis of the name. You have Midjourney, you have Night Cafe Creator, and so on. There are so many programs specific to whatever you want to do. You want the system to write an essay for you, it'll produce it for you in 2 minutes or less, probably 5 seconds. And there are programs like a Writer and Write Sonic and so on. You want to write lyrics, it can do it for you. And now I think it's advancing to do it in other languages as well, music, stories, whatever. You wanted to write code. So this is an important thing that Indian IT companies will have to figure, because we have armies of code writers. And now systems can do it, like the Microsoft Gift Hub or the Copilot. So Indian IT companies will have to completely refurbish, rethink their strategies going forward as this automation takes over. But it's not without the downside. So there's a lot of dependency on the data. Like, for instance, India is very well positioned because we have so much of data, except that it's not structured, it's lying all over the place. But as such, we would have more information than any other country on the planet. Now, there was this interesting case, just to illustrate that the computer can often go wrong. There was this passenger on an Ariane airline flight. It's a Colombian airline. And the food tray, sort of got unhinged and came down the aisle and hit him on the knee. So he filed a case. He filed a case in the District of California courts. And he hired a lawyer, a company, a legal company, to support his case. And that company gave 8 case laws stating that this happened in this particular case and this and that. One of them was Varghese versus the state. So I don't know how Malayali got into that, but Varghese versus the state was one of the case laws that it gave. As it turned out, all the case laws were fabricated. The artificial intelligence engine was hallucinating. So there are many cases like this. For instance, AWS at one time was using an artificial intelligence engine to hire people. And then after some time, they noticed that the system was very biased because many of the CVs that were, or the cases that they were dealing with before, showed a bias towards males versus females in hiring. And so the system absorbed that bias and it was exactly doing the same thing. So there are lots of cases like that. There are a couple of public disasters as well. If you look at Microsoft Tay, it was supposed to help in Twitter, analyzing what happens on Twitter. And it started abusing people who were using it. So they quickly withdrew it. And then there was Meta's Galactica, which was supposed to be focused, I think, on science and technology, if I recall correctly. And it started publishing all sorts of results which weren't true. So that's the downside of artificial intelligence, and that's why it needs to be controlled. And there are many questions that therefore face us. For instance, in April 21, a car without a driver, there was nobody in the driver's seat, there was a guy sitting next to the driver, somebody in the back. And it was a Tesla car. It crashed into a tree. It took 38 hours for the flames to be put out because of the batteries. But the more important question was that therefore, since nobody was driving the car, presume it had hit a human being, who would be culpable? And what if the vehicle decides that it has two choices between hitting this wall or hitting this person or hitting this child, and the artificial intelligence engine takes a decision? What is the ethical framework within which it's operating? So there are lots of other questions that come up. So interestingly, the Vienna University of Technology is studying the Vedic texts to figure out and create a framework which artificial intelligence can use, which can be an ethical framework which they'll fall back on. So they're studying the Mimamsa, which is part of the Vedic texts, and they are trying to look at the deontic philosophies which can be translated into computer language. And the deontic philosophies, which are there in our Vedas, is all about what you can do and what you can't do. So what you're allowed to do and what you're prohibited from doing. So again, a lot of work in the works. And then of course, the problem of deep fakes. They're so authentic, you can't make out. For instance, if you see the artworks that the computer could produce, even a specialist, even an expert won't be able to make out the difference between what is done by the system and what is done by Salvador Dali or Picasso or whoever else it might be. Now let's talk about AI-led smart manufacturing, because this is where it's going. And we have a lot of predictive analytics in play, whether it has to do with production, with logistics. Now the other thing is that now you can link it to sales and you can link it to demand, and you can link it back to your production as well. So you have a system now which can look at the environment as well and figure out what your production needs to be and where it needs to go. So clearly with artificial intelligence and its effective deployment, you can increase the output, you can cut your energy costs, you can reduce rework, which are all the invisible costs, and you can cut waste, and there's a lot more precision in whatever you do. So automation is moving ahead very fast, and if you see the levels of automation in production, what we're seeing is that in South Korea it's about 10%, in Germany, Japan, and China it's in the vicinity of 4%, in Sweden it's 3.5%, but it's getting there. It's increasing year on year. And we already talked about preventive maintenance, we talked about quality control, we talked about the dynamic flexibility that you get when the engine is operating. So this is a report that came out. It was done by Microsoft and Ipsos, And what it basically says is that when CEOs, a bunch of CEOs were asked as to which is the area that they will focus their AI resources on, 80% of them said manufacturing. Okay. And the second picture that you have, on the right-hand side, it says that if you look at the areas that people are getting proactive about in terms of using AI, 51%, leading the others is also manufacturing. But the biggest issue before all of us, many of you have already started the journey, so you're well aware of it. But many are getting started, and there are lots of questions, like which platform do I use? Is the system going to be on-premise? Is it going to be on the cloud? Or is it going to be hybrid? Do I have the infrastructure? Because artificial intelligence consumes a lot of IT resources. For instance, OpenAI, if it wasn't for Microsoft giving them access to their digital infrastructure, they would not have been able to get where they did, because it consumes a lot of resources, and all the data centers consume huge amounts of power, so it's a very expensive exercise. So companies have to ask themselves, do I have the infrastructure? What more do I need? Okay, and when I buy something, is it going to be fully utilized, or is it going to be a waste? How am I going to deal with my current infrastructure? What about data security? Cybersecurity, especially now in the industrial environment, because of SCADA and all the other vulnerabilities, there is a lot of data security issues creeping up, and of course a lot of compliance-related issues. And then we have to look at scalability. Once you start, how are you going to scale up? And how much is it going to cost? So a lot of questions. Now, one company that I'm working with, incidentally happens to be in Chennai, is working on this, and we find it's a very interesting area to get companies started on the AI journey. So I'm not even going to the left, because there's a whole lot of process there in terms of, how to get started. But the gist would be the points that I put on the right, which is that it has to be embedded in strategy. You can't lead with technology, you have to lead with strategy. What's your plan? Where do you want to go? Second, the tone of the top is very, very important. If it doesn't pervade the organization starting right from the top, projects like this, which can go in any direction, progress can be slow, understanding of people can be limited, there won't be any progress. So the tone of the top is very, very important, and there has to be an execution discipline. Then there is your own domain expertise. Don't compromise that. Like for instance, when we worked with Bangalore Airport, it is not our understanding of the business of airplanes and airports. We were able to leverage their domain expertise. So you are the people with expertise. Don't compromise on your own domain knowledge. Bring it to the table. Only then projects will become far more effective, useful, and show outcomes. And there's no scope to copy. Even within a vertical, within an industry, there are a lot of commonalities, but you can't copy. There's no cut-paste. You have to adapt. You'll have to see what makes sense, where you are in the journey, and how you're going to process, how are you going to proceed. Prioritize. There will be 100 things that you want to do. And that's the recipe for complete confusion. So you need to choose wisely, you need to prioritize, and then seek clarity from the people you're working with as to every stage of the way. And seek clarity about the outcomes that you're going to see every part of the journey. And finally, if you're not clear about the outcomes and what you're expecting, it'll be a never-ending and very long journey. So I think generally my experience has been that these 5 principles help in terms of getting clarity about where to go and how to adopt AI. So one thing is certain, the world is changing fast. I forget the name of a book, very interesting book, which talked about different industries. It's called The Digital Vortex. Came out about 10, 15 years ago, and there's a newer version. But essentially what that book said was, in the digital vortex, there are all these industries and they're all going to be pulled into the center. And this artificial intelligence, particularly digital transformation, anyway is disruptive. Artificial intelligence makes it much more so. It's like everything being drawn into the center where things can collide and things can combine and, industries which existed can disappear and new industries can come about. So there's going to be this huge vortex and, they talked about different industries and how it would affect them. And so essentially, the playbook that we are used to is not going to work anymore because the future is already here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have time for a couple of questions. Anyone having any, please put your hands up there.
Hello. Hello. So, recently when the ad of Apple was, when they launched the iPad, they crushed music instrument, sports, many things. So, it is again, when it coming to AI can build an actor who can act better than humans. They can paint with a 3D painting or using AI. So, what is the future of human creativity?
Oh,
Where it's
I think we'll need a philosopher to answer that. All I can say is that if we don't control AI, you and I won't know what the end game is. We can't predict it. Yep.
So I think then what we are going to do is take a short break. So can we take the rest of these questions offline in the interest of time? I hope that's okay.
Thank you very
with
much.
You.